In a bustling airport terminal, a white police officer handcuffed a black man for simply asking about a delayed flight. What Officer Holmes didn't know was that Jerome Harper wasn't just any passenger. He was the CEO of the very airline operating under that roof. The confrontation spiraled into a clash of power, prejudice, and justice, exposing deep cracks in a system built on bias. What happened next would shake the foundations of everyone involved. But let's start from the beginning. Langley International Airport thrummed with the cacophony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and hurried footsteps as travelers navigated its vast terminals. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long rays onto the polished floors of Terminal B. Amid the usual bustle, Officer David Holmes strode with purpose, his heavy boots echoing on the tiles. His sharp gaze darted across the crowd, searching for anything, or anyone, that might disrupt the order he felt personally responsible for maintaining. Holmes, a middle-aged white cop with a weathered face and a perpetual scowl, prided himself on being the law within these walls. To him, authority was more than a job. It was a shield, a weapon, and a way to assert control. He walked with the confidence of someone who rarely faced consequences for his actions. Near the airline check-in desk, a voice rose above the din. Holmes zeroed in on the source. A tall black man in a tailored suit, his demeanor commanding yet calm, speaking firmly to the airline staff. The interaction appeared tense, the man's hand gesturing towards a clipboard held by the visibly flustered attendant. Holmes's steps quickened. His mind painted a familiar picture, a potential troublemaker, disturbing the peace. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside and come with me," Holmes ordered as he approached, his voice carrying the weight of presumed authority. The man turned, his expression composed despite the commotion. He introduced himself evenly. "I'm Jerome Harper, and I'm simply inquiring about the delay of my flight." His tone was deep and measured, betraying neither anger nor frustration, only an expectation of respect. To Holmes, this calmness felt like a challenge. Jerome's poised demeanor seemed like defiance, and that was enough. "Step aside," Holmes repeated, a trace of irritation creeping into his voice. Jerome held his ground. "Officer, I assure you there's no need for—" Holmes didn't let him finish. Without waiting for clarification or considering the explanation, he seized Jerome's wrist. "You're creating a scene in a public space. That's grounds for detention," he declared, his voice rising to ensure everyone nearby heard. The metallic click of handcuffs snapped through the air. A murmur rippled through the crowd, passengers slowing to watch as the suited man was restrained. "This is a misunderstanding," Jerome said evenly, though his brows furrowed in disbelief. "I assure you—" "Save it for the station," Holmes barked, cutting him off as he gripped Jerome's arm and began marching him toward the security office. Around them, onlookers exchanged glances. Some whispered, others stared in stunned silence. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. The sight of an impeccably dressed black man in handcuffs, escorted by a white officer, painted a stark image that would not be forgotten. As Holmes led Jerome away, he was oblivious to the consequences brewing. His actions, born of unchecked bias and a thirst for control, were about to unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. For Jerome Harper was not just another passenger. He was the CEO of the very airline operating in Terminal B, and the ripple effects of this encounter would soon crash down on Holmes, his badge, and the system he represented. In the cramped security office, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the sterile white walls. Officer David Holmes sat rigidly behind a metal desk, his posture exuding smug confidence as he scrawled Jerome Harper's name onto a form with deliberate strokes. His pen hovered momentarily over the paper before he glanced up, a smirk playing on his lips. "What's your name again?" he asked, not even bothering to meet Jerome's steady gaze. "Jerome Harper," came the calm reply. Despite the cuffs still biting into his wrists, Jerome's voice was unwavering, his eyes fixed on Holmes with measured intensity. Holmes scribbled the name without a second thought, then leaned back in his chair, letting it creak ominously. "And what exactly were you doing causing all that trouble at the desk? Didn't like the seating assignment?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. Jerome sighed, his patience visibly fraying at the edges. "I was asking about flight delays," he said plainly. "I have a meeting that can't be missed." "Oh, really?" Holmes jabbed, crossing his arms. "What's the rush? Got somewhere important to be?" Jerome tilted his head, his composure unshaken, despite the clear provocation. "I actually do," he said smoothly. "But you might want to finish processing me quickly. You're not going to like where this goes." Holmes's smirk deepened. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, as if relishing the imagined upper hand. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" Jerome opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a loud knock broke the tension. The door creaked open to reveal a man in a security supervisor's uniform, his face pale and visibly strained. "Officer Holmes," the supervisor said in a clipped tone, glancing nervously at Jerome. "Could I have a word outside?" Holmes groaned and pushed back his chair. "This better be important," he muttered, throwing Jerome a glance before stepping into the hallway. As soon as the door shut behind them, the supervisor's voice dropped to a low, urgent whisper. "Do you know who that is in there?" Holmes frowned, confused by the sudden seriousness. "Yeah," he said dismissively. "Some guy who wouldn't follow instructions. Jerome Harper, or whatever." The supervisor's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's Jerome Harper, CEO of Unity Airlines. You just cuffed the owner of the airline operating this entire terminal." Holmes blinked, his mouth opening slightly before snapping shut. "What?" The supervisor's voice dropped even lower, each word laced with panic. "He owns the airline, Holmes. The man you just dragged through the terminal in handcuffs owns the damn planes parked outside. And let me tell you, if this gets out, you're going to have more than internal affairs on your back." Holmes's stomach dropped as the weight of the supervisor's words sank in. The smug confidence that had defined his every movement now drained from his face, replaced by a dawning realization. He hadn't just overstepped. He'd made a catastrophic mistake. Inside the room, Jerome sat calmly as Holmes re-entered, his face flushed, but still trying to maintain composure. Holmes cleared his throat. Mr. Harper, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Jerome leaned forward, his eyes steady. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you call arresting me for asking a question?" Holmes stammered. "Look, no harm was meant. Let's just get those cuffs off you." Jerome held up his hands, still cuffed. "I'm listening." The next few minutes were tense as Holmes fumbled to unlock the cuffs. Meanwhile, Jerome's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up and read the message. His expression shifted slightly, but he remained composed. "Officer Holmes," Jerome began as soon as the cuffs clicked off. "I'll be forwarding this incident to your department's internal affairs unit. You'll be hearing from my legal team. But more importantly," he stood up, straightening his suit jacket, "I'll be speaking directly to your chief. This level of racial profiling is unacceptable." Holmes paled, but before he could respond, Jerome added, "I trust you'll reflect on your actions, officer. Have a good day." The fallout was swift. By the next morning, the airport incident was plastered across social media, accompanied by the headline, Black Airline CEO wrongfully detained by police in his own terminal. Unity Airlines released a statement backing Jerome and condemning the profiling incident. Within hours, the police department was flooded with calls demanding accountability. Holmes found himself summoned to the chief's office, where he faced a grilling he wouldn't forget. "You embarrassed this department, Holmes," the chief growled. "You're lucky Harper isn't suing us directly. I can't keep this quiet." Meanwhile, Jerome's response was measured but firm. In a press conference, he stated, "This isn't just about me. This is about the countless others who experience this every day, but don't have the platform to fight back. Change is overdue, and it starts now." Holmes was ultimately suspended without pay, but the broader impact was undeniable. The incident sparked widespread conversations about implicit bias, training reforms, and accountability in law enforcement. As for Jerome, he returned to his role at Unity Airlines, more committed than ever to using his influence to fight for equity and justice. "Sometimes," he told his staff, "you have to go through turbulence to reach smoother skies."